All right, so just to let you know, I'm going to be taking my mask off for this presentation. So if you feel like you're too close, you can scoot back a little bit, but I'm way over here. Don't worry about it, okay? So you can understand me. Okay, so now you can understand me. My name is Dr. Jonathan Cressy, and I am the CMO of Fundamental Sounds. I've been here several years giving audio panels, and this year I'm giving 3. I'm giving this one that you're all at, and then there's a panel on the Reaper DAW, the Digital Audio Workstation Reaper, and what you can do with it, and then also in a slight not change, but sort of move from what I usually do. We're going to talk about on Saturday night the fundamentals of audio, because that's something that if you're trying to learn the trade of being an audio engineer and making your own music or making other people's music, you instead of wondering how a compressor works, if you know the fundamental principles behind how all audio works, it's much easier to understand, and then you can kind of tell when someone's feeding you BS on YouTube or when they're saying something that actually makes sense. What you guys, you all heard was, if you came in early, you heard Night Sun Journey, and then this last one was called Monolith. Those are from a CD that I'll be releasing probably in the next month that was a real trumpet player. And one of the things I wanted to mention about that, not just because this is a shameless plug, but also because what we're trying to do with this genre of acoustic instrument and electronic music, we're actually looking for people who make electronic music who would be willing to work with acoustic instrumentalists in order to try to move that more forward, because we're trying to get more people interested in playing acoustic instruments like the trumpet. And we think that this would be a really cool way to do it, because you wouldn't need to necessarily hire a pianist to go play something. You could just throw on a track and do it. And it's kind of cool. I hope you guys liked it. I think it's neat. So you can feel free, if you're interested in that, to contact me at jonathan@fundamentalsounds.com. You could also do the Twitter thing. I'm not really good at Twitter, so anybody who's actually followed me is probably like, in 2 years, I think I've done 2 or something, but I'm going to try really hard to be better. I promise. Just like the other guy that I just watched. We're going to be a lot better. If you want to learn more about Fundamental Sounds, you can go to the website, but that's enough for now. We can talk more later. So today, we're going to be talking about microphone choice. And this is something that everybody talks about, and there are countless reviews online of what microphones you should buy, and if you're a voiceover artist, you should do this one, and if you're a trumpet player, you should do this one, and all of this stuff. And unfortunately, although that advice is nice, there isn't really a way to pigeonhole this stuff. You have to understand not only what the different types of microphones are, but the different polar patterns, how they pick up sound, and how microphones hear sound, to best pick what will work for you, or at least what gives you a better idea, right? Back when I started audio, you could call up Sweetwater and say, hey, could you send me 5 or 6 microphones? I'm going to go try those out, and then I'll send you back the ones I don't like. Now, that's not really a thing. Like, they're like, yeah, we'll do that if you give us like 25% restocking fee. And on a $4,000 microphone, that's a lot of money, right? So this will help you at least get closer to what you're looking for. And even maybe if you already have microphones and you've already have that budgeted for what you're doing, how you could better use the microphones that you have to help make better music, or to better capture whatever you're capturing. Real quick, how many people in here are capturing, because I'm assuming you're all here about microphones because you're involved at least in some way in audio. How many people here are about the concept of spoken voiceover? Okay. How many people are here because they want to record their instrument? Excellent. And then everybody else is just whatever they want to record. Someone else's instrument, maybe. Okay, maybe not. All right. But the first thing you have to learn, and this is a Dr. Cressy-ism, if anybody has ever, I used to teach college at Frederick Community College, and sometimes my students would show up, and they always know that I say this all the time. okay? You can't fix it in the mix. That is a misnomer. You never go into recording something thinking, oh, I'll just fix that later, okay? If you do, you're going to make your life really hard because you just can't make it better, right? And so the concept of equalization is not a replacement for poor mic choice or placement, okay? It's super important. You try to use the microphone, the best microphone for the job. And if you don't have that microphone, you have to learn how to use the microphone you have to optimize that. Okay, so like for instance, in those recordings that you just heard, I recorded a trumpet. Okay, I used a particular microphone. I did not use the microphone that everybody tells you you're supposed to use with a trumpet, which is a ribbon microphone. Because frankly, ribbon microphones sound good on certain kinds of trumpet players, but sound horrible on the one that I recorded. Not to mention, there are other aspects of microphones that you have to take into account. For instance, dynamic microphones such as this SM58 or a ribbon microphone, they take a lot of power. They're not very sensitive. And so you have to crank the gain up on your microphone pre. And like this album was recorded on a Focusrite device because we were in a studio at his college and they record using Dante software and Focusrite units. The Focusrite preamps were so noisy that I couldn't even use a ribbon microphone if I wanted it to sound halfway okay, because they just got so noisy as I turned the gain up. So I was limited in that. And I knew that might be an issue because of the different aspects of microphones. So the first thing you need to know is there are two styles. There are not three styles. There are two. There are dynamic microphones, okay, and condenser microphones. That is it. I know on Sweetwater they have like a section for ribbon microphones. Those are not different. They are dynamic microphones. A dynamic microphone operates off of, so you can get some science here, right? It's not just art. There's some science in this too. Electromagnetic induction. It means that a magnet moves in a coil of wire and that causes an electrical current, right? It's how speakers work. Those speakers work via electromagnetic induction, right? We pump electricity into the speaker and the positive and negative pulses of that electricity move a magnet in a coil, which makes the tweeters and the woofers go. And that's how you hear it. It then activates. So it's like the opposite of a microphone. They're called transducers, right? So they change one energy, which in this case for speakers, it's electrical energy, into acoustic energy, which is what we hear. The microphone, on the other hand, does the exact opposite. It takes acoustic energy, it moves a diaphragm, which is connected to a magnet, or actually a coil, sorry, and it vibrates, and it changes my acoustic energy, my sine waves and everything that's coming out of my mouth into electrical pulses, which then can be recorded or sent through a mixer and then just sent right back out to you via a speaker, okay? So dynamic microphones are mostly known for being super durable. The SM58 is used, actually this is a Samson R21, which apparently is an exact copy of an SM58. They're used specifically in live sound, not exclusively, okay? But specifically in live sound because they're so durable. You can take this microphone, well, maybe not this particular one, but the Shure microphone, you could dip it in a bucket of water and pull it out and still use it. You can swing it around your head and smack the person in the first row and still use it. You could drop it on the floor, run over it with a car. Well, maybe not run over it with a car, but close, right? They're super durable. They're like hammers. And the only dynamic microphone that doesn't do that is a ribbon. And ribbon microphones are, they are made, well, actually, hold on. No, I can't do it because it's copyrighted material. I cannot show you, I'm sorry. But basically, it takes a U-shaped magnet, or maybe two magnets on either side, and there's a flat ribbon that goes in between it. And as the ribbon moves from your voice or from whatever is doing it, it then causes that electrical current. The problem is those ribbons are 0.3 microns thick. So that means you sneeze on it and they break. You put them outside, they break. You drop them, they break. You actually move them without putting some kind of cover over them, they break, right? They break all the time. And so whenever anybody says, oh, I like ribbon microphones, well, that's good. I hope you have a lot of money to send them back to get them fixed, because they're constantly being fixed. But they're super delicate. But most every other dynamic microphone is very robust. And the other thing about them is they're not very sensitive. They can take loud sounds really well. This is why the go-to microphone setup for an electric guitar cabinet is what? Do we know? Yes, but there's one in particular. No. SM57. The SM57 is the go-to standard if you want if you want any kind of hard rock and roll sound, that is the mic you use, period. And the reason is because that was the mic they had. And because you had people like, Jimi Hendrix and name famous guitar players that I can't right now. Everybody used it, and their music was so good that everybody's like, I want their sound. So you use that microphone because that's their sound. But yeah, they use it because guitar cabinets can get so loud. Like if you want to capture the distortion of a guitar cabinet, they can get so loud that if you put a condenser in front of it, you'll actually peak the microphone itself. Like you'll distort the microphone. Whereas you can't distort a dynamic mic. I won't say you can't. I'm sure somebody has. But like if you want to record a jet engine, that's what you put behind the jet is a dynamic microphone, right? So it's for loud stuff. So even for like a trumpet, if a trumpet's going to come up there and you're going to play lead trumpet on some kind of like, Miami Sound Machine cover band, you're going to want to put a dynamic microphone in front of that trumpet player because he's going to be playing so loud that you need to be able to handle that kind of sound. So dynamic microphones are really durable and they handle a ton of sound. And that's really important, okay? Condenser microphones, on the other hand, use capacitors to create the sound. They use what is called electrostatic induction. Okay, so electrostatic induction instead of electromagnetic induction. They're called condenser microphones because in England, capacitors are called condensers. I don't know why. It is what it is, right? So a condenser is basically a capacitor. And that capacitor creates positive charge when the capacitance gets, this, by the way, is in no way the absolute scientific way of explaining this. So if there's an electrical engineer in the audience and you're like, he's wrong, right? Yeah, just let you know. I know that I'm wrong, but technically speaking. But there are two plates. There's a plate on the back and a movable plate on the front. And the capacitance of the capacitor generally is a ratio of the dielectric or the material in between the two plates that doesn't conduct. And so as it comes in, you get one electronic pulse or electrical pulse, and as it comes out, you get another one. And that's how it moves one energy to another. What makes this very interesting is they're incredibly sensitive. So you can put this in front of anything that is super soft, and it will pick up all of the nuances of what is being done. So in general, we tend to use these a lot in a studio. Yes? Okay. Think of it as, so every instrument has what is called an envelope, right? And that it consists of an attack, an initial decay, a sustain, and a release. There's this little graph that if you come on Sunday, we'll talk about it, or Saturday, whatever. But it's that envelope is every instrument has that envelope, okay? Human voice, anything has it. And the nuances are in the different parts of that spectrum, right? So if, for instance, you're using a dynamic mic, you might be able to pick up an initial attack of a snare drum, but you might not get the sustain of it because it's too soft for the microphone to pick up. And so you lose tone, right? The sustain is the tone. So that could be a nuance. Or if a flute player is playing a melodic line and decides to get very soft and intimate, you will actually lose that on a dynamic microphone. Like it'll just get so soft you won't hear anything. And that's because it's not sensitive enough. So it's the musical nuances. It's also, if you're doing spoken word, it would be the difference between someone maybe being sad versus being forlorn, or some other kind of emotion that is a very subtle coloring that we hear in our voice when you're right up next to someone and you're talking. But if it's not being picked up, those are like the nuances of it. It's more about a performance. It's capturing the performance. Does that help? Yeah, it's the performance, really. It's capturing that performance. Because, for instance, like a rock band, there's no need to have condenser microphones necessarily, because although there may be nuances to a performance, they tend to be very loud nuances. Right? They tend to be incredibly loud, so they'll be captured by a dynamic microphone. Whereas condenser microphones might overload because the performance is so loud, kind of thing. But they're sensitive. They also have to be powered. Dynamic microphones do not have to be powered. We can plug them into a microphone preamp and away you go. Okay, but condenser microphones require what is called phantom power. And phantom power is anywhere between 12 and 48 volts of power that is transferred from a microphone preamp to the microphone in order to energize the capacitor and then make it work. Okay, so it requires phantom power. The problem with that is well, it's less of a problem now. But when I started, a lot of interfaces didn't have phantom power. That was like boutique premium stuff that you had to get phantom power. And now pretty much everything has it, but in general, it is something to consider because you may have to plug your device in order to use it. Whereas this doesn't need to be plugged in because it can be powered without phantom power. So that's one of the benefits of using like one of these mics up here, right? One of the big benefits of using a dynamic mic is because it's not sensitive and it doesn't require phantom power, you can get away with using a less than expensive, although this is a relatively expensive mixer. But also because this is so non-sensitive, so insensitive, I guess, so insensitive of a thing, this microphone won't pick up somebody who's over here. Thus, you won't get feedback. I mean, you will, like I could cause feedback if you really wanted me to, but like, because they're not sensitive, that helps with the feedback aspect, because all of these mics are live. Like I didn't go to the mic, I don't want to mess anything up, but see, they're all live, but you're only hearing me through this one, pretty much. So that's another benefit of not being sensitive. Yes? Absolutely. Yes. The only thing you'd have to worry about is, it's one of the reasons why the radio industry uses SM7s or SM7Bs, sorry, or RE20s, which is a Electrovox. They use them because, and they use them like right here, right? And see, now I sound like I'm on the radio, right? On your drive home from work. And they use it very close, but they can be in a studio with multiple other people and they can all be talking and it's only coming through their microphone because it's so insensitive. So yeah, absolutely. And SM7Bs are one of the top considerations if you're a voiceover artist. Like if worse comes to worse, you don't need to buy something super expensive. You can just buy one of those and use it, and it's pretty close. The problem would be really is just that those nuances, you might not pick up some of those nuances because it's not as sensitive. Yes? Yes. No, I'll show you what those are in a minute. Yeah, so those are called shotgun microphones, and I'll show you in a second. because that's actually perfect. Thank you for that. We go to directional response. So microphones don't only have the way they capture things, but they also have the manner in which they capture them. Not only the frequency response, but also the direction. This microphone here is what we would call a hypercardioid, and you'll see them in a minute. You'll see the polar plots. And there you go. A polar plot is a graph of how a microphone hears the world. These microphones are called hypercardioids, which means they're very directional. They pick up really well right here, but as I do this, things get a little, it's a little hard to hear me, right? I mean, I'm projecting somewhat, but now you can hear how I get a little bit louder now that I'm here. You can hear how things change. And that's because the pattern is very pointed. So it doesn't pick up a lot from back here, which is really good if you're in a noisy room and or a room that's not treated. And it doesn't pick up a lot around here, which also helps. Okay, so that's what a polar plot is. And so there are a bunch of them. There are like 8. The first one is an omnidirectional microphone. Omnidirectional microphones hear in all directions equally and evenly. They are the most transparent microphones, and they are the ones that are used most often when recording classical orchestras in a hall. It's because people who record classical music, such as myself, are very, very particular about making things that are perfect representations of what actually happened. And we tend to use omnidirectional microphones to do that. The problem is if you're in a really less than stellar hall, then things are less than stellar and you cannot do anything about it. Or if you have a less than stellar orchestra, which are a lot of them, then they sound like less than stellar orchestras. And although that's a little less, it's a little hard to make a bad orchestra sound good. But this is a omnidirectional. So it hears evenly in all directions. Subcardioid. A subcardioid is kind of like an omni, but as you can see how the lines are, that at 180 degrees, we're now like, it looks like 10 decibels softer. So it rejects a little bit of what's coming from behind it. And this is helpful if you don't want to pick up a lot of the hall because it's not very good or something, right? You want to reject what's behind it, that kind of thing. Then you get to the cardioid, which is named cardioid because it is an upside down heart. It is not a butt, but all my students think it's a butt. So there you go. Whatever you want. That's on YouTube right now. All right. It does. It does. It gets better. So, maybe. So this has what is called a null spot. So you notice like directly behind the microphone at 180 degrees, in a perfect world, you have no pickup at all. And you can see that most of the pickup behind the microphone is like 15 or 20 dB down. So it's very, very soft. That's another thing we'll learn in the foundations class that I'm going to teach on Saturday, but decibels aren't linear, they're logarithmic, which means every 3 decibels you drop, you are having the power, not having 6 decibels. Every 6 decibels, you are having the power. That means you're cutting the volume down by half. So when you drop something 20 dB, that's a lot of decibels, a lot. So we use cardioid microphones almost exclusively when we're trying to isolate instruments or isolating performers. So pretty much every mic that people use for vocals is going to be a cardioid. Yes? Yes. It's very good at eliminating things that are behind it. But this is one of those things though, right? When we get to technique, like if you're doing voiceovers and you've got all sorts of acoustic treatment behind the microphone, or you've put the microphone in a box like the YouTube people do, and you're like, oh, why do I still get echo? Yeah, because there's nothing behind you. And that's where the microphone picks everything up, is in front of it. So like you're talking to the microphone and activating the room, and the echo is coming in the front of the microphone. Oh, someone's back there. So that's something to think about. Sometimes you need to have the stuff behind you more than you need the stuff behind the microphone, because if you're using a cardioid microphone, it's not going to pick up a lot back there anyway, right? And also, like if you put microphones in boxes, it tends to sound like you're talking into a box, because you are, right? So think about that when you make the portable vocal booths. But cardioids are really good at isolating. The problem with cardioids is they do this. As you get closer to the microphone, your voice gets lower. So if you want to get really, really close, your voice gets much lower. You can hear how different it is just by me moving forward. That's called the proximity effect. The closer you move a microphone, the deeper your voice will get. That's why radio personalities have a voice you hear, and then you go and meet them in person. You're like, whoa, you don't sound anything like that. And it's because they're busy with the microphone really up close to their mouth. And that can be a really big problem when you're doing vocals or you're doing spoken word, because you won't sound real. As much as some people might like to sound like this, it doesn't sound real, right? It sounds more real this way. And so we have to compensate for that by making sure we're away from the microphone. So that's also something to think about, that proximity effect. Yes? Let me put it this way. Proximity effect doesn't necessarily sound real. And if you're not going for real, then it'll be fine. Yeah, what I mean by real is like when I listen to stuff, right? If I listen to an audiobook, I listen to audiobooks like all the time. Like my business is in Little Rock, Arkansas, and I drove here. So 16 hours in the car listening to audiobooks. And I want my audiobook to sound like the guy or gal or person is sitting in front of me telling me a story. I don't necessarily want it to feel like that person is like right up against my skull talking to me. And that's what I get with this. I feel like it's too close. It's too scary. I don't want this. I want it to be out here. And that proximity effect is part of that, because you can solve some of that. Like if you have to record this close, because sometimes you do, right? Like a singer, like I've recorded numerous singers where they insist on being this close. You can actually solve proximity effect by using EQ, but we don't necessarily want to do that, right? Because of the second slide that says EQ's not, we don't want to use it necessarily. So that's why you just give it a little bit of distance. But it could be desirable. Like for so for like a grim singer in black metal, that is 100% desirable, right? They do it on purpose. They stick the microphone in their mouth to growl because it creates that rumble. Otherwise, they would have to scream so loud to get it that it would destroy their vocal cords. So they can sing very softly, but be very, very grim by using it really close. So sometimes it is desirable. Right. Right. Or like the ASMR people who get really close to stuff and they talk to you weird. Like, yeah, it can be used as an effect. It's perfect. I mean, that's why I wanted to say that it's not that it's not desirable, right? Like my thing that I teach when I teach people is that you can do anything that you want as long as you know you're doing it. The only time that something I consider to be wrong is when you didn't know. So like if you're making trap music and you're clipping your kick drums, that's correct, because trap music, you clip your kick drums. That's just part of the style. And if you don't do it, you're not recording trap music. It's just part of the style. So in that sense, it's important. But if you're just clipping kick drums because you weren't paying attention to the fact that you were clipping your kick drums, and then, at that point, then I would say, hey, that's wrong. And let's try not to clip them. And then, at least you need to know. That's my point. Does that make sense? Yeah. Because this, I feel and sometimes people won't know that this is, they know this is weird, but they don't know why. I notice that with a lot of layman's. Like I hear it as, oh, he's too close to the microphone or she's too close to the microphone, right? Because I do this all the time. But a listener might not know what's weird. They just know something's weird. And we want listeners to not ever think anything is weird unless it's on purpose to be weird. Does that make sense? Like we want them to be comfortable. We want them to listen to it and go, right? Like it's, it just sounds normal to them until we want it to not be normal. And that gives us a better effect. So that's when you could use proximity effect as an effect itself. Does that make sense? Yeah, I like to make my instruments sound as real as possible before I make them sound unreal, unless that's a specific thing that the artist wants or that we're going for, right? Then it's like, okay, now we'll make it weird or we'll do something, but everything is done on purpose. After cardioid, these are a little less used, is supercardioid. So it's a cardioid with a tumor on the back. And then hypercardioid, which is what this is. And notice what's happening is that the cardioid, I'll go back. So you see, whoop, it did not go back. That went forward. Okay, the supercardioid here. See how it's a cardioid, but it's starting to collapse on the sides, right? So here's the cardioid, it's out, right? We're like out almost, we're only down like 5 dB, but if we come here, now we're down on the sides, we're down 10. And if we go to the hypercardioid, we're down 15-ish, right? Or not 15, maybe 11 or 12. Again, so now what we're doing is we're compressing. So now all of a sudden the microphone is becoming more focused to what is directly in front of it as opposed to what's on the sides of it. This is a hypercardioid mic. Again, it's to isolate it from other things around it. So you might use a hypercardioid mic when you're miking a drum set because you don't want to have cymbal bleed. Or use a hypercardioid mic to mic multiple singers because you want to isolate them. Or like a singer-songwriter, like maybe use a hypercardioid mic on their voice and then something else on their guitar or whatever, right? They're there to isolate. Yes, no problem. Yes, you will. Right. Well, so basically there are drawbacks for everything, right? The problem with the cardioid is it has really great, or I should say, the cardioid has really great rejection from the rear, but the sides don't reject a lot. So it has a relatively wide pickup pattern in front of it, right? So if you have people who are close together, then that cardioid might not be as good, like on the sides, like this. So if you don't have a lot behind the microphone, but you have a lot on the sides of the microphone, then a hypercardioid might work because then this is what you're trying to isolate from as opposed to what you're isolating back here. But you are correct. They're more picking up from behind. And yes, those are the drawbacks. But you may find that this works better because of the things you're trying to isolate from. Does that make sense? So the next one is bi-directional or the figure 8. This is almost solely because of ribbon microphones. Because ribbon microphones are a ribbon that vibrates back and forth, and it's the same whether you're in the front of the microphone or the back of the microphone. But if you go on the sides where the magnet is, the ribbon doesn't vibrate this way. It only vibrates this way. So you get a figure 8 pattern. These can be useful if you want to record 2 people at the same time. It's been done, right? You put one person on one side of the mic, one person on the other, and you record, and they'll be one mono channel, but they will be isolated to some extent. So a lot of the old time recordings are like that. Like if you've got people like a backing vocal and a vocalist and like a 50s rock and roll band, they may have the guy singing up here and then the backing vocalist might come behind the microphone and then sing onto the other side. Because then you had track count issues, a lot of other things that were limiting you. If you ever go and look at like the Kingston Trio, there's some pictures of them actually singing around an omnidirectional microphone. So the microphone's in sort of the middle of them, and they're all around the microphone with their guitar and their conga drums, and they're singing. And that was literally the record. It was just that microphone and them being cut to an album, and that was it. And it was like, there you go, next album, right? And so there are ways that you can use this, but this is something more to be aware of, because if you use ribbons, this is going to be an issue, because you're going to have a lot of bleed from the rear of it. But they are helpful. Like if you're doing a singer-songwriter, you could actually turn the microphone so that the top of the microphone comes to where the person's mouth is, and the bottom is sort of stretching down to where the guitar is or whatever they're doing. And that way you're picking up both relatively evenly. So that could be done. And then this is the one that we were talking about, the shotgun microphone. This is a directional microphone. See how narrow the beam is, how narrow the pickup pattern is? This is what a lot of, well, like 100% of the people who work on movie sets, this is what you use, right? It's a boom microphone. It sits above the frame. You're talking this way, and it's literally only picking up the person it's pointed at. Okay? Yes?
So if it's above, it doesn't matter that the sound's coming out straight out of the mouth.
Mm-mm. Yeah, I like to think of it more like you're picking up sort of this part of the sound. There will be somewhat of less of a pickup. Like if it's dead on, it's going to be much louder, but it's still going to pick it up, and it's going to isolate a lot of the other things that are around. But in general, they kind of try to point it at the nose, like it's up and down this way. Absolutely. And if you watch really close when actors are talking, sometimes you can notice they don't move very much. Like they do, but you can kind of see how their heads kind of stay on a swivel where their heads kind of stay. But then also if they have problems with that, then they'll go back and they'll replace that dialogue later using the same microphone in a studio. And they'll just replace all the dialogue. That happens a lot now. ADR, right? Automatic dialogue replacement. So shotgun microphones are very useful for voiceover work because they isolate you so well. It's like if you're dead on that microphone, you're going to hear it, and if you're off at any amount, it's going to get significantly softer. And so that's really, really helpful. So a lot of YouTubers, they'll use the shotgun microphone right outside if you don't want to use a lapel mic kind of thing. By the way, I have to say this because I think it's funny as hell. I was watching a review of a microphone, and the YouTuber, hopefully they're not in the audience, they were talking to the microphone saying, this is my favorite microphone ever, and they're, it's by this company, blah, 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 and all of this other stuff. And I'm like, man, that doesn't sound like that microphone. Like I'm listening to it and I'm like, that's not, because she was moving in and out on the microphone and her voice wasn't changing. And I was like, this is so weird. And then she moved the microphone just that much. It was a side address microphone, so it was big and thick. And I saw the lapel mic that was right here. And so they were getting the audio from the lapel mic while they were viewing and saying it was the audio from the mic in front of them. So that's something that you need to be aware of when you watch YouTube videos, that they're for entertainment purposes, and entertainment by definition is fiction. And so you have to be very careful because they could be using the audio from a shotgun microphone out of the frame, and you're not getting anything that microphone actually sounds like. So it's something to keep in mind. So after directional response, I know this is a lot, but now we have to go to frequency plots. Okay? Yeah. Uh-huh. Yes. They're called multi-pattern microphones.
So is that change occurring on the microphone physically, or is that just like some electronic thing happening on the back end? Are those really a good representation of those pickup patterns?
So they are derived. They're not like physically them. So there is something physical going on. Most modern multi-pattern microphones have two diaphragms. So they have two capsules. They'll have one front capsule and one back capsule. And when those are added together, it gives them a figure 8. But then when you start changing the phase of the back capsule and add it in, you get all of the different patterns. And so to answer your question, they are good, but they are not the best representation. The best representation is when a capsule is specifically, they're called pressure gradients. It's when they use the design of the outside of the microphone to create the pattern. That gives you more of a true representation of what that pattern is. I would probably, okay, so I wouldn't necessarily not choose a multi-pattern microphone because they're not good, because they're fine. They work they just well. I might recommend buying 2 microphones if you can, because then you can use it on 2 different things at the same time. Whereas with a multi-pattern, you can only do once. The more modern multi-patterns are much more innovative. They actually allow output of both capsules. So you can record both capsules onto 2 tracks in your digital audio workstation and then use a plugin to on the fly later on during post-production to change the pattern of the microphone. So like Austrian Audio has one, Lewitt Audio has one. There's a couple that do that. And that's just really neat. You know, it's an interesting thing to be able to do. So I would say if you only need 1 microphone, then getting a multi-pattern microphone, again, budget allowing, they tend to be much more expensive, is probably the way to go because it's more flexible than having multiple microphones. But eventually, if you catch the same disease that I have, you'll end up buying lots of microphones just because you want lots of microphones. I have too many. Yes. Oh, gosh. I guess you could go to gearspace.com if you're feeling brave. Yes. The question was, is there a microphone collecting community? Yes, there are. Again, it's not something specific. You know, it's like Gearspace is a big one. They used to be called Gear Sluts, but they're not anymore. They're Gearspace. And the problem with them, but I guess this is in every community, is they tend to have a lot of trolls and a lot of people who are just like, no, you're stupid for buying that. And, or why would you want that? Because I do, and leave me alone. Like, I'm a big fan of Sony microphones. Like, I have an extensive collection of Sony microphones from the 60s, 70s, and 80s. And I really like to use them on my recordings. And people laugh at me all the time for using them, but I think they're fantastic. But there you go. It is what it is. So the last thing about this is frequency plots. Okay. So frequency plots, here's an SM58. This is this microphone, basically. What this is telling you is that this is decibels on the left, frequencies on the bottom. And basically what it's saying is that 0 is sort of the microphone is not emphasizing or de-emphasizing anything that crosses that 0 mark. But anything that goes below 0, it's de-emphasizing those frequencies. And anything that goes above 0, it's emphasizing those. Notice how the SM58 is billed as a microphone used for vocal performance. And this is what vocal performance microphones look like, because it takes out the proximity effect to some extent. As you see, it rolls off the low end automatically. And you see way up, I can't see, 10K, 8K, 9K, all that area up there, way to the right, that big bump. That bump is called a vocal lift. And that's where all of the enunciation comes from. It's also where all the S's come from too. But with that bump, it makes the voice sound clearer. So if we had a microphone that was transparent, meaning it was 0 all the way across, and there are microphones that are, ideally like that, where they don't emphasize anything. Most people find them to be dark. They'll listen to it and go, wow, that's a really dark microphone. No, that's what you sound like. But you're used to hearing yourself through things that emphasize the dictive parts of your voice. Yep. Yep. Yeah, but only when an S happens. But yeah. Well, I mean, it is. It's one of those things. You can have it, or you can get a really, a transparent microphone and not have it. It's kind of up to you. We sometimes are slaves of style, right? So if I want to make a pop recording, so I have a pop artist and I want to do a pop recording. If I use a transparent microphone on that pop artist, the artist will come in and go, "What is wrong with my voice?" Because it doesn't sound like Taylor Swift or, I don't know. I always use her as an example because I don't know of any other ones. But like people will get mad. Like artists will get mad. They'll be like, that's, you're not any good. I don't sound right. So you have to understand, okay, what does that artist want to sound like? And once you find that out, you go, okay, that person wants to have a pop sound. I want to use a microphone that gets me to that pop sound as quickly as possible. And that's what this kind of microphone would in dynamic land. In condenser land, this is a U87. By the way, Neumann's not very good with their plots. It's not like a razor flat line. It's like someone took a marker and just drew it. But the big thing that we want to look at is that big bump up at 10 kilohertz. That, again, is a vocal lift. This is why people like to use U87s for vocals. Originally, this microphone was actually developed for what we call diffuse field recording. Okay, so in an orchestra, if your microphones are close enough, or let's just say an instrument, piano, whatever, if your microphones are close enough to an instrument that the instrument is louder than the reverberation, the room sound, you're in what is called the free field, okay? That's when flat microphones are really good because it's picking up exactly what's going on. But as you move back from that instrument and the room gets louder than the instrument, you are now in the diffuse field, and acoustically you lose energy. You lose high frequencies the further away you get from something. So by the way, in a recording, if you want something to sound further away, not only make it softer, but then roll off the high frequencies, and your brain will go, holy moly, that's really far away. Like that's called psychoacoustics. It's like where you trick your brain into thinking something's happening because you know what signifies in your brain that something is far away. So what they did in order to combat this moving back, right? Because then the orchestra would get darker. But they don't want it to be darker. They want it to be flat. So they added that boost at the top end where there tends to be most loss to even out the frequency spectrum so it would go back to sounding flat. That's why the vocal boost exists. But then they started using those microphones in studios to record artists like Frank Sinatra and all of those others. And they were like, wow, this is actually really cool. We can really understand him, right? We got a lot of diction, and it's because of that. And so that's why the majority of microphones, pardon me, nowadays have this as a default, right? This is like the default setting for most microphones nowadays is the vocal. And it's because it literally is the largest acoustic group that we record. Most people record vocals, spoken word, whatever. They don't record a lot of other instruments. We use MIDI for that. I'm guilty of it too. I have a pop artist that we needed a piano part. And so I hired one of my piano friends to play it on a MIDI keyboard. And then I just downloaded a patch and I used the patch. Because we didn't have a piano to record and I didn't want to go find one and I didn't want to spend the money. So I did it that way, right? So I'm guilty of it too. Here's another relatively famous, this microphone's like $15,000, $20,000. It's a Sony C800g. I do not own one of these as much as I like Sony microphones. These sound horribly bright. They are so bright. They are so bright because of that huge bump. I mean, that's like 5 decibels of big bump. Okay, these are used very often, or at least they're supposedly used very often in rap recordings and hip hop recordings, because things that are very bright tend to sound more aggressive. Because in order for something to be very bright, like I told you, right? If something's far away, it's going to be dark. So if something's really bright, where's that person? Like right here. So if you want to yell at somebody and record yelling at somebody, then having that brightness makes it super aggressive in your face. Yes? Okay. Yes, there is. Because using EQ operates off of the fundamental principle of phase. And phase is a time thing. It's in the time domain. And what that means is you're delaying the sound. The problem with that is if you use too much EQ, right, even digital EQ, what will happen is you'll start to add these tiny delays into the signal, and your recording as a whole, the more EQ you use, will get more and more blurry. It's subtle at first, but it can get to the point where everything just sounds blurry. And that's because you've used so much EQ, like on every instrument, to adjust for poor mic placement, that the instruments itself now are all delayed at different points. They've all got these little phase anomalies. And then you'll say, well, we have linear phase EQs. We do. We have linear phase EQs. The problem with them is they ring. You can actually cause a linear phase EQ to ring. And if you have enough linear phase EQs in your audio, you will audibly hear rings. So again, you run into this problem. What do I do? So you really want to try to get as close to the sound as you're going for in the recording phase. I know it's hard, and no one will believe me, and no one says this anywhere that I know of. But trust me, if you can get things to sound as close to the way you want it when you record it, your life becomes immensely easier. Just immensely easier. I was in a studio, and I was in a studio recording, and I brought the artist in, and we just hit play. And the guy was like, wow, this sounds like a record. This sounds great. When can we release it? And I was like, we haven't mixed it yet. And he went, you didn't? And I'm like, no, all the faders are straight across, but we spent hours placing microphones, right? Like I moved things like centimeters to get the sound that I was looking for. And that's why I show you this mic. Notice how it's interesting. There are 3 lines, right? 0 degrees, dead on. 90 degrees over here, right? 90 degrees. 180 degrees over here. Notice how the frequency response changes. So if I want a more transparent sound with this particular microphone, less bright, what do? I sing into it this way. Maybe I sing into it this way, like this. You don't always have to sing directly into a microphone. This is what's called microphone technique. You actually can move the microphone to change the way the microphone sounds. In general, as you turn a microphone, this is called off-axis recording, the microphone will get darker as you do that. For instance, okay, here, placement is key. I can actually turn one microphone into another microphone. So look, here is a KM131. They don't make these anymore, but they were very, very, very expensive when they came out. That's $1,000 just for the capsule. You have to buy the other part too to make it work. So that is what we would call a free field Omni. See how it's straight across? Again, this is a Neumann, so they're pretending with that. It's not really flat, but it's close, right? And it's a free field Omni. Most people bought this one, KM130, because it was $300 cheaper. Notice how it has that presence boost because this is a diffuse field Omni. This is something to be further away. So, right, how do I change this? Well, if you look at the polar plot, I know it's hard to see, but you'll notice that as the frequency goes up, the polar plot shrinks. It gets more directional. And if you notice that it's even too small for me, at 90 degrees, we lose the exact amount, 10 decibels of 10 kilohertz at 90 degrees. So if I take the microphone and I do this in front of the orchestra, because it's Omni, right? It picks up all around, this way and this way. It doesn't matter which way I point it. But if I do this, all of a sudden now this microphone is flat and transparent, what it's hearing. Because remember, the thing is here that it's picking up. So this is the loudest. So this is going to be flat. If I do this, now all of a sudden it's bright. So just by turning it this much, I have 2 microphones in one. It's very important, microphone technique. And, this could be an entire lecture on its own, microphone technique and showing how you can place different things and how to do it. But what's most important is to know that you can. That no one has to sing directly into a microphone or even speak directly into a microphone. You can do this and do the same thing. The other benefit of this is it's not only not as bright, but you notice that it doesn't pop as much either, right? Where this pops a lot. So being able to move a microphone, that will change its sound. Unfortunately, a lot of microphone manufacturers don't tell you what will happen when you move the microphone. You just have to test it out. Okay, but it's something to keep in mind, right? One other thing that I want to say about microphones when you're choosing them, and that is cheap mics versus expensive mics. Why are one better than the other? I have come down to say that it is only one thing that makes them better, and that one thing is called self-noise. Cheap microphones hiss just on their own. Like you plug them in, and some of them are so bad that they just go tss in the back of your recording. That is what a cheap microphone does. That is why microphones that are cheap are cheap. It's because they have self-noise. Yes, they also tend to be brighter, but I don't necessarily consider that a bad thing because maybe you want bright. That's totally up to you, right? But that self-noise is not cool. The reason people could get away with self-noise was back in the old days, we had tape, and tape was already noisy. And so when something had self-noise, it blended into the tape noise and it was just fine. That's why everybody likes tape because, oh, it makes everything fuzzy sounding and warm. Yeah, that's all the noise. Well, now we have digital. And digital is super clean, like really, really quiet, right? Something that's recorded at 24 bits is like a, what's 24 times 6? Anybody math oriented? 148 decibels of dynamic range. That means the noise level is negative 148. That is so beyond human hearing, it's not even funny, right? Like the room that you're in is noisier than the digital recording. That's why, by the way, recording at 16-bit is just fine. Because seriously, just don't clip microphones and it's fine. But the room is noisy. But that also means it highlights microphone noise because now you don't have the tape noise behind it. So you've got to be really careful. The other problem with that, and here I'm basically giving you a catch-22, is noise figures on microphones are all fake because there's no standard measurement. So for instance, I love the company SE. I really do. I think they like their SE, the T2 microphone is one of the coolest microphones I've ever used on anything percussion ever, and double bass. Fantastic. But they have a mic that they claim to be the quietest microphone made, and people will plug it in and go, why is it hissing? And then they plug in their microphone that says that it's much louder. They plug that in and it doesn't hiss. So it's just something to think about when you spend your money on a microphone, to just think about, that SE microphone. It's called an SE8. I think they charge like $200 or $300 a pair. If something is $300 a pair, it's going to be noisy. It's just the way it is. So you might have to spend some more money to lower the self-noise of a microphone, especially things that people are doing for YouTube and stuff. Like those shotgun microphones that are relatively cheap, they tend to be very noisy. But it doesn't matter because people gate the microphone, meaning that it's a noise gate. So it's on when you're talking, and then when you're not, it turns off. So you never notice the noise because the microphone is constantly being it's not being turned off and turned on, but that's how I think about it. The door opens and closes. So I don't have a lot of time, but if there are any more questions, I apologize. I always run really late with my talking. Yes? Okay. Okay. Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
And like place them on table stands around. What about idea? And then like two kind of put it angularly and decide where the players are, and like one on the opposite side of the table. And anyway, I just feel like it could be better. My classroom full load, my lofted, ceiling off and play. But is there a better kind of microphone that would work better for that?
What are you trying to do? So do you want to pick up it as a performance, or do you want to pick it up, like meaning as a performance as a whole, or do you want it to be more individual where everybody has their own mic?
So I think that the purpose of we stream it live, so it's all going to go out together. But I would love to have people like take it and put it as a podcast or something.
Right.
High quality enough to understand and listen to it.
So if you wanted to do it individual, like where, because so like if you wanted to eliminate as much room noise as possible, then one of the things that you could do is you could put a dynamic mic on every person, like an SM57. They're like $100 a piece, and you put one on each person, and that will cut out a ton of room noise. But everybody will have their little stand, and they'll have to be in front of it. It'll have to be like here, but they'll be able to do whatever they're doing, right? If you want to pick up the actual, like not only their performance, but their reactions with everybody as a unit, you could use the microphones you have and you could put them in a stereo pair. So what you would do is instead of spreading them really far apart, you would put them closer together, right? Specifically, probably 30 centimeters apart at 90 degrees on a stand. And you would put that like right over the players. Over them, like boom, like this, right? And then your dungeon master, or whoever, he or she would have their own microphone, right? And what you're doing now is you're picking up what someone would hear in that room if their head was sitting right there listening to them. And if you got it close enough, you could probably kill a ton of room. The other thing you could do is instead of getting foam doesn't work for acoustic stuff. It's a big lie. It just doesn't. Go to like GIK Acoustics or something like that, or go on YouTube and find a tutorial on how to make bass traps. They're basically like insulation in a wooden frame covered by something so you won't breathe in insulation, which is very dangerous. And you hang those in the studio from the ceiling and the walls. The reason I say GIK is because because they make fantastic products. They don't sponsor me, but they're fantastic. And if you show them a picture of your room, they'll actually design something for you, and everything is mobile. So like you could buy a couple things and then buy a couple more or whatever, and you know they're already making it for you. So unless you have woodworking tools or something, it's not as cheap. But you put those over your studio and you'll kill a lot of the echo in the room nodes, and then it'll be even quieter. But because you already have 3 or 4 of those cardioids, you can put a stereo pair, and like hang it like right in front of them. Right? So like they're here and those microphones are like right here when they're talking. And what'll happen is you'll actually hear them move. You'll hear like if the person's over there, it will sound like they're over there, especially if they're wearing headphones. Like you'll actually hear the movements. And that's actually kind of cool because then you don't have to pan it in the system. So that might be really interesting to hear. By the way, if anybody has questions, no one has come to kick me out yet, so I'm just going to sit here and talk to you all until they kick me out. But if anybody has questions, like stuff like this, just feel free to contact me, and I'm happy to help you, right? Just, send me an email, shoot me something on Twitter, whatever, and I will do my best to help you because this is what I do. I love to teach and show people what's going on. So if you have any questions, just let me know. All right. Any other questions while we're here? Go over there once. Okay. The first piece of advice is you'll need an external microphone and some way to get that into your computer. So either a USB mic or a mic and an interface. Thank you. And then make sure that microphone, do you care if it's in the shot or not? Yeah, so if you don't care if it's in the shot, then you put it relatively, like about this close, and it will do wonders for your calls. Yeah. Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
musicians will have like a front. Is there any purpose behind it? The like position where they're kind of talking over it, I guess simultaneously less pop.
I would think I don't know the specifics to that, but it would probably be less pop, and you have less of the proximity effect because you've turned the microphone, so it's changing the pattern, not pattern, but changing the frequency response. So it might be that might be why they do it. If anybody's noticed, like musicians when they sing into a microphone, you'll hear them sing the note and then they move the microphone away. That's how they control their dynamics. So they're actually, the movement of those microphones is what controls the dynamics of their performance on stage. So there's probably a reason. I would assume it to, again, I would think on access with a pop filter. Yeah. So just buy pantyhose and put it over a coat hanger and then tie it around the microphone. And that prevents the pops. And you're like about this far away. And this would sound really good because it sounds natural. Like it sounds like you're speaking to someone across the table from you. And, it works really well that way. That's how I would do it. And I would probably use a dynamic microphone for a podcast. If you went condenser, then you might want to turn it a little bit like this. But then you have to be careful of who's next to you because then it'll pick them up. So you have to be a little careful. All right, they're kicking me out. So that's my contact. If you want to see me again, Saturday, 1:30, I think. And yeah, I'll see you then. Thank you so much.